Hello everyone, welcome back to our channel Bones Not Milk. Here we do a microscopic decipherment of those problematic biblical texts and passages as well as theological concepts. And today we are in the New Testament once again. We are in the book of Colossians chapter 2 verse 16 and verse 17. I'll quickly read it in your hearing. Let no man therefore judge you in meat or in drink or in respect of an holiday or of the new moon or of the Sabbath days, which are a shadow of things to come, but the body is of Christ. Before I get into my decipherment, don't forget to subscribe to this channel and also check some of our previous videos. I believe you'll be helped. And remember to share with others. That's the reason why we initiated this channel, so that we can help each other and share these messages so that we won't have problems when it comes to interpreting the Bibles in today's age. Let's go back to our subject this morning. We are looking at this passage, which is very problematic. It's one of the most problematic passages in Christianity, where many teachings have sprouted from. Some people that speak about the Sabbath days, the holy days, the foods that we eat. And today we want to do justice to this passage. This is also one of the letters that were written by Paul. He wrote this letter to the believers in Colossae. And for us to understand what Paul is entailing, we also need to check the background to the church that is writing to. That's one of the tools that you need to use when you are approaching the writings of Paul. What was the background to this church in Colossae? In Colossae, there were two dominating groups of people that were now a cancer to the believers. The first one were the Jews, the Orthodox Jews. Judaism was so high, and Paul is addressing the heresy that was being taught by these Orthodox Jews, because this heresy insinuated itself into the church in Colossae after Paul, has left the church that he has planted in his days. So legalism and also the enforcement of the ceremonial laws to the Gentiles was one of the problems that were found in this church. These Orthodox Jews, they were now compelling the Gentile Christian believers to also adopt Judaism and all the ceremonial laws if they really wanted to be Christians. The other teaching that was there was coming from the pagans. Half-converted pagans were now bringing in the doctrine of polytheism, where they were now, bringing the idea of some angelic intermediaries who acted as agents for creation as well as mediation. So they were now saying, it's not only God who is divine, the one who needs to be worshipped, even angels, they can stand as mediators. So Paul was seeing these wrong doctrines that were sprouting in the church. He had to address these problems. That's the reason why Paul wrote this letter to the believers in Colossae. But Colossians chapter 2 verse 16, looking now at the context, it is being addressed to the teaching that is coming from the Orthodox Jews. These guys were now forcing the believers to adopt the ceremonial laws that were in the Old Testament. They wanted them to adopt the worship of the Old Testament church. So Paul is now, remember, this was against what Paul has been teaching the other believers, because Paul had been telling them that they no longer need to follow these ceremonial laws. They are now need to accept Christ and Christ alone. That is all that they needed. So there was now a problem and a battle that was raging in the church, and Paul had to address this problem that was now coming in the church. Paul is telling them that no, these ones were shadows of the things to come. You don't need to continue abiding by these ceremonial laws and the ordinances. They were shadow of things to come, but the Orthodox Jews were enforcing them upon the Gentile believers. You can even check verse 14 of the same chapter, and as well as verse 15. Paul was actually saying these ordinances were against us. Paul's argument is, you failed. These ordinances, they seem to have failed you. Why do you want to impose them upon these Gentiles? Let them follow Christ and adopt the doctrine of Christ. That is all that they need, because these ones were terminated on the cross. And it seems like this message was not only brought to the believers in Colossae, it was brought to almost all the believers in the Gentile churches. Check Ephesians chapter 2 verse 15. Paul is also explaining that these ones were abolished in Christ. You can also check Acts chapter 15 verse 10, where Paul is defending his ministry to the Gentiles before the church fathers in Jerusalem, telling them that you don't need to impose these ceremonial laws, one of them being circumcision, upon these Gentile believers. They have accepted Christ. That is all that they need. He is the only one that they need, not these ones that were offered to the Jews in the Old Testament church. Let's look at some of the teachings that Paul is bringing in this passage that have become a problem in Christianity, and try to address them contextually, biblically, so that there won't be any problem from here henceforth. The first teaching that is coming here, Paul is saying, let no man therefore judge you in meat. And some people, when we bring the oath message, they are quick to say, you are the guys that Paul was addressing. You are telling us not to do away with meat and to adopt a vegetarian diet, but this verse has nothing to do with the meat versus vegetarian diet. No, the word meat that Paul is using there is brosei in Greek. Its dictionary form being brosis, which simply means food. You find that there are many passages where the word meat is substituted for food. So according to this passage, according to this context, it's not meat as in flesh, the flesh of animals. It is food. So Paul is saying, let no man judge you in food as well as in drink. And remember, we need to understand the context. Paul is referring to all the ordinances that had to do with the Old Testament system, which were a shadow of things to come. So when Paul is saying, let no man judge you on the food and the drinks, we need to understand what Paul is saying. And you realize that Paul is referring to the meal and the drink offerings that were presented, by the Israelites in compliance with the sacrificial system in the Old Testament, which were codified in the ceremonial laws. When you look at the ceremonial laws in the book of Leviticus, you find that there were some meat and some drink offerings that were done there. And these ones were all a shadow of the things to come. They were all meeting in Christ. So when Paul is addressing the meat and the drink here, he is addressing those offerings that had to do with the Old Testament system. Paul is not arguing over things that we eat today. I know there are some people, who argue that, Paul implied the abolition of the prohibition, the commandment that prohibited people from, eating and not eating some of the flesh animals, according to Leviticus chapter 11. So they say every animal has been cleansed because Paul is saying, let no man judge you. But this has nothing to do with Leviticus chapter 11. That one in Leviticus chapter 11 has nothing to do with the Old Testament ceremonial systems. Paul here is addressing all the meat and the drink offerings that had to do with the Old Testament ceremonial system. That is what Paul is talking about, which is a shadow, of Christ, because they pointed out to his sacrifice as well as to his ministry. So according to this passage, Paul is not giving us the permission to eat anything. That is not what Paul is saying. Paul is actually not telling us that we are supposed to eat anything as Christians. No. According to Paul, Christians are no longer obliged to carry out the requirements of the ceremonial laws according to the Old Testament system. So the meat and the drink offerings, they met their fulfillment in Christ. This is what Paul is telling us in this passage. Let's go to the next one. Paul also speaks about the holidays. And there are also some Christians who now say, when you tell them about these pagan holidays that we have today, they will say, you are judging me. Paul said, let no man judge you on the holidays. But Paul is not referring to the holidays that we see today. Remember, it's Holy, not Holi. So Paul is referring also to the holidays that had to do with the sacrificial system. The context is the Old Testament sacrificial system. These Jews are saying you need to adopt them. And Paul is saying we no longer need to adopt them. They're all met in Christ. So which holidays is Paul talking about, which we see they met in Christ? There were a lot of Jewish feasts that they did. These are the ones that Paul is referring to. The Passover, the Feast of the Tabernacles, the Pentecost, the unleavened bread, the first fruits. All these, they met in Christ. So Paul is saying, let no man judge you on these ones. You don't need to abide by these ones because they all got their fulfillment in Christ. You can check Leviticus chapter 23. That is where almost all the feasts of the Old Testament are recorded. What about the new moons? A new moon was the first day of every month. So when Paul is saying, let no man judge you in the new moons, it is because there were some offerings that were made at weekly basis, at monthly basis, as well as at yearly basis. So Paul, when he's saying, let no man judge you on the new moons, it is because of those offerings. So it's not specifically about the day. It is about the activity that was conducted on that day. So Paul is saying, on the new moons, there were some offerings that were offered, which were also a representation of Christ. So Paul is saying, you don't need to impose those ones upon the Gentile believers, because they all met their fulfillment in who? In Jesus. So Paul is saying, let no man judge you on the new moons. You can check, Numbers chapter 10, verse 10, as well as Numbers chapter 28, verse 11, where you see these offerings that were offered on every new moon. So the activity is the key, not necessarily the day. And the last one, which is very problematic, is the Sabbath days, where Paul is saying, let no man judge you on the Sabbath days. And there are many people who has now rejected, the 7th-day Sabbath, because they are saying, Paul said, we don't need to be judged on that one. But remember what I said. Anything that had to do with the Old Testament system is the one that Paul is referring to here, not any other thing that is outside the sacrificial system. The 7th-day Sabbath was not initiated for the Israelites. It is not part of the sacrificial system. The 7th-day Sabbath was initiated at creation. Genesis chapter 2. That is where we find the 7th-day Sabbath coming years before Israel was. So when Paul is saying, let no man judge you on the Sabbath day, he is not referring to the 7th-day Sabbath. He is referring to the Sabbath, to the sacrifices that were done, like they were called like ceremonial Sabbaths. You can even find them. They are there in Leviticus chapter 23. One of them is in verse 6 to verse 8, where Paul is saying, these ones, let no man judge you on them. These ones, they all got their fulfillment in Christ. This has nothing to do with the 7th-day Sabbath, but it has everything to do with all the ceremonial Sabbaths that we see that were kept by the Israelites in the Old Testament system. So Paul, when he's coming, he uses the same word. Remember, words are very important. But because Paul understands the people that he's speaking to, and the people understand what Paul is saying, there was no problem in the church in Colossae. It is only the modern day Christians who now have a problem when they hear the word Sabbath. They quickly run to say, we no longer need to keep the 7th-day Sabbath. But remember, the 7th-day Sabbath had nothing to do with the Old Testament ceremonial systems. No wonder why the 7th-day Sabbath is also going to be kept in the new earth. Isaiah chapter 66, verse 22 and verse 23 tells us that we will keep the Sabbath. If it was something that had to do with the Old Testament system, why do we see it in the future? What about Paul? Paul even kept the Sabbath. Why would he keep the Sabbath, the one that is telling the believers not to also keep? Not only Paul, the disciples, the church fathers, when we read history, they continue to keep the Sabbath. So the Sabbath that Paul is referring to here are the ceremonial Sabbaths that we find in the Old Testament that had to do with the Old Testament sacrificial system, not this one. Paul is trying to pull down the following and the hold of the ceremonial laws, because they all got their fulfillment in Christ. But the moral law abides even to this very day. If you say the moral law is the one that Paul is saying throw away, then I'll ask the question, can we now commit adultery? Can we now steal? Can we now kill? Because all those ones are part of the moral law. So Paul was not touching the moral law. He never had a problem with the moral law. The problem that he had were the ceremonial laws that he had to do with the Old Testament system that were given specifically the Old Testament church. So Paul is saying, you are now the New Testament church, you don't need these ones. They don't need to be imposed upon you, because we now follow Christ. They all got their fulfillment in Christ. They were types, Christ being the antitype. Now, because the antitype has come, the type loses its value. So Colossians chapter 2 verse 16 is not difficult to understand when you read it according to its context. When you contextualize it, when you check the background, you find that Paul did not even denounce the Sabbath. He did not denounce the foods that we need to eat and those that we don't need to eat. Paul is trying to help us understand that the Old Testament system got its fulfillment in Christ. From there, we no longer follow the feasts that were conducted in the Old Testament system. So Paul is not against the health message. When we bring the health message telling you that you don't need to eat this or that according to the Bible, you need to accept it because the Bible does not change. When God says these foods are unclean, they are unclean. No one can cleanse what God has made unclean. So that verse had nothing to do with the clean or the unclean animals, because those ones were not codified in the ceremonial laws. These were given for God's people because they were clean animals. Even before the Israelites came into existence, God had already told Noah that they were clean and unclean animals. When he told him bring animals in the ark, he told him bring sevens of the clean and pairs of the unclean. So the clean or versus the unclean was not codified in the Old Testament ceremonial laws. They were not given for the Old Testament system. So we need to understand that that verse had nothing to do with Leviticus chapter 11, as well as the Sabbath. The seventh-day Sabbath was given at creation. It has nothing to do with the system that we find here codified in what we call the ordinances in the Old Testament. So folks, we don't need to interpret the Bible in a way that is not biblical. Let's allow the Bible to interpret itself. That way we will be helped. And we also don't need to ignore the truth because we are not comfortable with it. When it comes, we need to adopt it. So according to this passage, let us not use it to denounce the seventh-day Sabbath. Let us not use it to denounce what we need to eat and what we don't need to eat. This verse specifically has everything to do with the ceremonial laws that were codified by Moses in the Old Testament, specifically for the children of Israel. I hope you are being blessed by these presentations. Remember to subscribe. Remember to subscribe. Remember to like this video. Remember to share with others so that everyone can benefit from it. I upload a new video every week, so watch out for the upcoming video. And remember also, if you have questions, you can put them down below on the commentary and we will address those questions. If you also have some topics that you feel like you also need them to be addressed, put them on the commentary box below. We will address them without fail. God bless you.